Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning, a fantastic podcast by two volunteer fire chiefs that give nonsensical advice, absolutely terrible recommendations, and the most incomprehensible set of plans that anyone's ever conceived to try and present and follow. So good luck, Godspeed, and hold on. Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning. Today we're reporting out of Toolville with the mayor of Tooleyville.
Handy Manny.
Today's podcast, we're going to be covering something just a little bit different. We're going to be talking about training and just kind of shotgun perspective on it. Training is one of those things, it's pretty simple to jump online, look at some YouTube videos, and it all pretty much covers solid stuff. There's good ideas out there, but what may be specifically needed for one department universally at face value may not actually be it's something that's truly usable to everyone out there. So this is that great discussion between what a rural volunteer fire department versus that urban rural interface, and then just an urban volunteer fire department's going to train on. And we might even dabble a little bit going into talking about kind of things that are very, very specific to your district. Like I know of a volunteer fire department in Pennsylvania that has a steel mill. They're going to have a little bit of a different response on something like that. And that's not going to be universally trained on when you get into another areas that, well, frankly, they don't have a blast furnace.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that, and I think we need to kind of touch on just kind of some of those skills that get left behind because people don't reinforce some of that training to reinforce some of those basic skills and talk about that, because I see a lot of guys in a lot of departments they'll spend 500 hours training on search and rescue, but they never pull a hose out, and that's not as good. I mean, you kind of got to practice what you don't do very often, but at the same time, you need to brush up those skills on the things you do a little bit more, because you can get better at them.
What's Jesse, what's one thing that you've seen just, we'll call it in the last 2 years, that something that you've seen needs to be addressed, but we haven't necessarily had the time or even the opportunity to kind of go and actually do the training on it, and it still be applicable to any, we'll just call it possible day.
Yeah, and for me, one of the big things that for us personally that I see, and I've tried to work it in and address it and get it more in the forefront, is that accountability side of that, and using accountability systems not only for real life, but use them in training and practice those skills. And I've had a real struggle with that as a training captain, getting that brought to the forefront of everybody's mind that that's something we needed to do. And basically, up until this point, I've been a failure at it. That's a little tough pill to swallow sometimes, and I know the importance of it, but it's something that I keep plugging away at. I'm not giving up by any stretch of the imagination on it.
Do you think that actually has anything to do with the fact that we're terrible at accountability, or just the fact that literally in the last 2 years we haven't had a call where accountability was legitimately a concern, issue, or I would even argue a dire need? So obviously you want to have good standard practices, but outside of the last 2 years, and other than one call, the dire need of accountability is not there, because these units still check in with command and they know who's there.
Yeah, they know who's there in a general sense. They don't know where everybody is. And I look at it as that's one of those things that it really doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost anything but some time and a little bit of effort to be better at it. But when the time comes when you actually need that, it's too late to figure it out. You're so far behind that you can't go back and make it. It's kind of like putting the poop back in the horse. You can't get it back in there. It doesn't work. So that's just one of the things. And I've seen departments, and I've seen it be good, and I've seen it not be good. And honestly, most of the time, it's in that not so good realm. It's just something that I personally see as important in my perspective of it. Doesn't mean that it is the greatest of importance or not. That's just my perspective of it.
I think one of the biggest hampering factors on this is that, particularly being volunteer, you don't have a guarantee of who's going to be command on any given scene. And what you end up getting, and this is going to be true anywhere because the chief's not at every single call, or assistant chief, or necessarily the exact same captains. So you're going to have just this inconsistency in trying to establish and develop the consistency in the system. And I'm not making excuses. These are facts. It's just the way it is. And I see that being a contributing factor as much as anything else.
Oh yeah, no, that's for sure a challenge. And I think part of the challenge too is that's just some of that in training side of it is that classroom just horrible, working out the bugs of the system and doing tabletop stuff that, we have less participation in, and it's on and on and on. And, even if you get a good training night, a drill night, and you have half your department there, well, you still have half your department not there. So how do you get the other half back to the same spot that the first half was at? And it's just, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges with any initiative that has to do with stuff like that, whether it be accountability or even working through response protocols or something like that's something that everybody needs to be on the same page about. It's tougher to do in that volunteer situation for sure, because it's not just a memo that goes to the 3 shifts and everybody gets the same information. I mean, we have people that we may not see for 3 weeks, and then they show up and they don't have a clue what happened in the 3 weeks they were gone.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what made me just think of this. One thing that, and this is definitely a training thing, and I see this a lot, and it's not just here. This is pretty much universally on any scene. You get on scene, someone's assigned a task, and it's particularly with a hand tool or maybe a small engine hand tool. It could even be just chalk it up also to small engines. And the fact of the matter is that people do not know how to use like a sledgehammer or a maul or an axe. And I mean actually use it, not just grab the handle and swing. And same thing, chainsaws, K-12s, ventilation fans. And it is funny because you can go to a big YouTube page that chronicles big fire departments that guys use chainsaws their entire lives doing vertical ventilation, and you would never handle a chainsaw that way. And I'm not talking about vertical ventilation. I'm talking about the physical way they're handling the tool is questionable sometimes. And it's I see it on our scenes. Now, I know particularly in our little academy that we do, we have an entire section that's dedicated to not how to use the saw to make a hole, not how to use an axe to hit something, but how to actually handle and accommodate your use of the piece of equipment. And being able to develop not just familiarity, but actually being able to use the piece of equipment.
I'm kind of a jerk, and I'm a real jerk to the guys that actually work for me. And I tell them all the time, if you'll just remember everything you see, hear, do, or read, rest of it's easy.
Right.
And there's a little bit of truth to that. And it's, it's more than just me being a jerk and being kind of passive aggressive and all that stuff. But if you'll just try to remember some of those things that you did, then maybe you don't have to relearn it every 5 minutes. Like, it's not that hard to commit a little bit of that to memory.
Yeah. Why keep making the same mistake over and over? I mean, you haven't, we'll just use forcible entry as the example. Forcible entry drives me nuts because there's really, really like two things that you need to do for forcible entry. If you have a maul or a pig, a lot of people don't know what a pig is. Small tool endorsement real quick. Pigs are awesome. Go look it up. You'll really appreciate it if you ever get one. And if you can't do it in one swing with a maul or a pig, get a chop saw, get a K12, and you're done. It's not a 45-minute demonstration on technical rescue. And that's one thing that's kind of a pet peeve of mine is and I'll probably get hammered on this. You can let us know how much you hate us and how wrong we are. You can just email us at ittasteslikeburnincast@gmail.com. And I'm not saying there's not a technical side to forcible entry, but there's also that Mongo picks up something heavy and breaks part of forcible entry too. And if you're not doing a emergency rescue, technical rescue, we have to be delicate with the bank vault door for whatever reason, then fine.
Bash it. Truckee bash wall.
Right.
Truckee bash door.
Go through it. Do not spend 25 minutes trying to force this stuff.
Well, and that's one of those things. We have these simulators, and we have a great forcible entry simulator that we have at our training facility. But as good as that thing is, it's not a real door. And it's not necessarily the same. And houses and doors are built differently, and all of them are different. And sometimes there's a screen door, and there's all these factors that go into that. But the premise of what you're doing is there, and you can practice a few of the techniques that get you 90% of what you need to know. But that opportunity, like I had an opportunity, it's been years ago, where a nursing home was getting demolished. Well, there's about 150, 200 doors in this nursing home. Raised my hand and said, hey, before y'all tear that down, can we go in there and do some training? We want to train on forcing doors. And there's a bunch of them here. And so there was 10 or 15 people that got all the doors they wanted to experiment with and all the things they wanted to try. And those 10 or 15 people got awesome training, but you can't replicate it because there's not a nursing home getting tore down every 6 months or every year. And that stuff's invaluable. And if you seize those opportunities, you're not going to get everybody, and you're not going to get the people that come later, but you're going to get a handful of people that are going to pick up some skills that hopefully they can hold on to, and they can pass those on to the other people. I mean, that one night I probably busted 20, 25 doors and got to the point where I was trying to be creative and figure out other ways I could do it. Just what if I only had a pinch bar? Can I get this door open with nothing but a pinch bar?
Yeah, now as far as I'm concerned, that's valuable. There's a very specific, it's kind of like forcing an extrication training where all they have is come-alongs and
hand tools.
Hand tools.
Yeah, I've taken that class.
And jacks,
great class.
And chains. Because what do you actually do if you are a small department? You have your one engine out there, you're doing an extrication, and your extrication equipment goes down. Are you done? Do you have to call mutual aid and wait for Swan Lake to teleport in 45 hours away, or, oh, wait, we have a Sawzall.
Yeah, or some snips or socket set.
Right.
Because that you put all your faith and trust into that set of rescue tools and in all of the awesome things that they can do, but realize that if the gas tank's empty, it's useless on the portable units. That's the end of the use for that. You could have all the hose and all the tools you wanted, but if for some reason the gas tank leaked out and evaporated in the truck, and you get there and it happened between it was checked last and today, you're toast. How do you make that work? And there's a lot to be said for those trainings where you think out of the box and do some of that stuff that's not the norm, those hand tool operations. I mean, the guys before us, that's all they had was the hand tools. I can remember even having the pneumatic tools still around when I started that predated the hydraulic tools, where they were using like air chisels. And
we still have a set of those actually on both rescue trucks, actually.
Yeah. And it's something that 90% of the time it's never going to come out. That's going to come out when it's that weird or everything broke for some reason.
Right.
Even if you have the truck mounted power unit, what happens if your generator crashes or, motor on the hydraulic pump burns up? That stuff can happen. It's mechanical stuff. It's going to break. If you think the mechanical stuff never breaks, you've just never had to take care of anything mechanical.
Now, do you have a specific training scenario that you like to run, but I've got one in mind. In fact, I'll give you mine because it's better to go through this scenario and then see if you have something that's kind of comparable to it. So when I was really involved with training, one of the things that we train on is the Denver drill, down firefighter rescue, RIT training. And when I teach the Denver drill, it's real simple. I just tell people, here's the scenario. We actually go on YouTube and watch the backstory on where the Denver drill came from. And then we have our prop, and that prop is all there. We have it intentionally set up with two big 4x8 pieces of sheet metal so that the firefighter only has, I think we're a hair wider than a standard Denver drill because everyone in Texas is fat.
Yeah.
And we need the extra leg room and shoulder room. But it's a true confined space Denver drill. And then we do everyone a favor by finding a guy that's like, real small, 6'2", 6'8", around that 580, 1,000-pound range, and tell him to get after it. I intentionally let those crews go in there, and I will coach them through it, keep them safe, not allow them to hurt themselves, definitely not allow them to tear, because we do a live victim on that, because we do our best to actually simulate true dead weight, not a dummy weight that not wearing an air pack, not wearing gear, and there's just certain parts of that. And I've got a bunch of dummies that are perfect. So we'll let the entire class just tear themselves apart trying to rescue that guy. And at the end of it, I always made a point of just saying, look, I can do the Denver drill completely by myself without all of you, and I'll barely break a sweat. And then we go in there, grab the guy's arm, and just pull him around the door into another room, and then drag him down the hallway and out the front door of the building. And I intentionally do that to let these guys not understand to stop being so tunnel visioned. What was the actual instructions I gave you? Go get this guy. That's all I said. I never said you had to take him 42 inches up off the ground and out that window. You did that because you watched a video on how to do that. That's the hazards of watching crap online without some actual hands-on instruction time on it. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. Doesn't mean that it's not a really good option. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't know how to do it. Doesn't mean that it's appropriate for the given scenario either.
Yes, that's that box, and happens to be a still box that's named after, an event that lost a couple, some lives were lost with. So that I do that all the time, and some of those out of the box thinking drills that I can think of, goodness, lots of stuff with ropes that I've done that try to get them out of the box and think about it. It's just like we had a lot of industrial facilities where I was from, so there was potential for some guy to be 8-9 stories up in an industrial plant that's just stairs. That's all you've got to work with, and you get there and somebody wants to rig up. Oh, we can put 3 ropes here and 7 pulleys there, or we can just put a tagline on the Stokes basket and slide it down the stairs. Works phenomenal. Right. And nobody gets hurt. You put a brake at the top, so if somebody slips, you just stop it, and works phenomenal. You can go down the switchbacks and stairs and just slide that thing right down. You don't have to strain, you don't have to lift, you don't have to do any of that stuff. And that's one of those instances of kind of getting it out of that realm of you don't have to overcomplicate it to get it done. Keep it simple, stupid mentality.
Yeah, to me, that needs to be applied to things like RIT. Don't get me wrong, I think RIT's one of the most important things that anyone needs to be to the level of muscle memory. I fully embrace the concept of RIT and the ideology behind it. But there's also a real famous cartoonist. His name's Paul Combs, and he has a phenomenal RIT cartoon where he shows this firefighter literally carrying everything off the truck, being prepared for RIT. And if you truly look at RIT, and I'm going to step off into some really deep, dark waters here, and I don't intend to be a pariah, but that's what's going to end up happening with this statement. We have to come seriously reconsider from a nationwide point of view on how we're teaching RIT. RIT's about speed. And I'm not going to just baby seal club this, because I know there's some ideologies that people aren't just committed to. They sold their souls to. And it works for them, and I'm all for that, and that's how they train, and that's the big kicker, is that's how they train, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I will still argue that the most benefit that a firefighter that's potentially downed or trapped or disoriented or lost is going to be more self-serving by doing a self-rescue, self-extrication, and teaching firefighters survival tactics and how to not only save our own but save yourself, and having the awareness to realize that I can't just rely on one group of people to come get me, particularly because I have the ability to do several things myself for myself. And you might even be trapped, literally trapped, pinned. Something fell on you. And there are things that you can do for self-preservation. And that also goes into the RIT concept. It's speed. It's only speed. The time clock on this is real simple. The firefighter went inside. They went on their air. Clock started. How hard are they working? It's Murphy's Law. An emergency is not going to happen in the first 12 seconds. They're not going to have a full bottle. It's not going to happen. The low air alarm's going to be going off, and then they stay an extra 2 or 3 minutes to continue to do something. Then it happens. So you don't have 20 minutes to get to them. And again, This is real simple to sit here and try and armchair quarterback this. It's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just simply trying to emphasize that for me, in the RIT training I do, the priority is speed. Speed, speed, speed. I really don't care about a RIT bag. I really don't care about 5 sets of tools. I really don't care about 70 different things going on. Now, does this completely change if we're dealing with a 400,000 square foot building with no windows or doors and one garage door that's in and out? Yeah, it changed. But if we're talking about a double wide trailer house, and this is the 600th one that we've had this year, chances are the crews are going to be pretty familiar with a double wide trailer house.
Yeah.
There's certain things that we can build on and compound on to emphasize speed that's a benefit.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times that tunnel vision kicks in on any of that stuff. And guys fail to realize that basically in that trailer house or that bungalow or anything that's not reinforced masonry, everything can be a door.
This sounds really weird, and this is a training thing. And I would almost argue that it's negatively affected me on the fire service side. In my professional career, the training that I did in aviation, something happened. The first thing you did is you stop and actually look at what the alarm is. Okay? Is it a master warning? Is it a master caution? Is it an audible alarm? Is it a visual alarm? Okay? So the event happens, and the first thing you do is stop and evaluate what the actual alarm is. Okay? From there, you segue and your eyes are going to dart to whatever else is potentially associated with those different alarms. Okay? Then from there, you're going to start confirming. This is quick. All of this happens in less than 3 seconds. Okay? You're going to start trying to confirm the physical problem by looking at the corresponding system to see if the system's showing you a failure or trouble or an indication of a problem. And then you're also going to start looking at your flight instruments for confirmation on what potentially is going on to indicate what the master caution, master alarm system's telling you. You're going to be checking circuit breakers. Here's my point, okay? I'm conditioned. I'm not one of those people when you walk up in like that random group of people and let's say someone drops something real loud and goes boom. I'm not one of those people that jumps and turns and kung fu panda rolls and karate chops in the air and screams. I stop and I just look. It's not necessarily a desirable characteristic on the firefighting side, but it's been beat into me on the aviation side. And there's a certain part of that, though, that I think needs to happen with a fire scene. And it comes back to radio discipline and having enough awareness to listen to the radio and hear that something's happening on the radio, and we need to stop and pay attention. Because this goes back to that RIT. Who's most likely to actually do the rescue of the firefighter? It's going to be the nearest crew.
Yeah.
That's who it's going to be. It's not going to be a RIT team. It's going to be the crew that's closest. And ideally, command's going to make that connection too, and they're going to at least attempt to see if they can have that crew that they think's closest, get them to continue their tasks that they're doing while working to the individual with the problem.
There's a tendency in a lot of people that I would say it's not fear, but it may be fear, but it's that I can't do that. I don't know how I'd do that. And that traps a lot of those guys into making stupid mistakes because they're afraid to do think a little bit about something to recognize that situation where they could fix this problem and self-correct their issue shortly.
When I kind of went on a segue there when I was talking about the aviation training. It's critical thinking.
Yeah.
How many people have legitimately been in a very high stress scenario and then continue to operate in that high stress scenario? And when you really push comes to shove, there's not a lot of people out there that encounter a high stress scenario, but then continue that still have to continue to operate under that high stress scenario. It really is. It's a really limited amount of people. Anyone that's in the military, any of your grunts, anyone that's going to be operating a very complex piece of machinery. Let's say they're a crane operator, and they're doing, a 4 million pound move. That guy, they're going to be stressed. You've got a woman doctor in the trauma ER, okay? And you have this most ridiculous injury come in the world, resulted in a horrific accident to a child. And she's the one that's going to have to go in there, take care of, do everything in her power to make things all better. On and on. And where I'm going with this is that a lot of people truly don't have that high stress, critical choices being made really until they kind of just get it thrusted onto them in that position, because it's hard to train for it.
And they don't know how they'll react to that. I mean, training helps, and that repetition and the motor, that muscle memory stuff helps with some of that stuff, but you literally can't put that into somebody's mind or make them understand that until they're in that situation.
Aviation has it where they train for it specifically. It's called Crew Resource Management, CRM. And there's a bunch of really good videos out there where we're going to segue hard on this one. So the FAA, after a very specific accident that came out of the Air Force, it was a B-52 that crashed in, I think, Wichita in the late 80s, early 90s. What came out of that was crew resource management, and it was a military accident. And it had some strong parallels to some civil aviation accidents. And what they found, two things. One is that the captain in this case, the dinosaur captain, would be intentionally screwing up in the flight simulator, and the junior or first officer wouldn't say a word. And he'd let that captain, even though he knew he was wrong, he would let that captain fly that airplane right into the ground. And they did test after test after test and found that this was the case. So they finally realized, they got a problem. And then another series of testing that they did, they had two very high-time 747 captains, both buddies. One's flying left seat, the one's flying right seat. The guy in the right seat knew that they were going to screw really hard with the guy in the left seat. Airplane starts experiencing multiple problems right after takeoff. And without it being a 40-minute story, the guy in the right seat intentionally made life hell for the guy in the left seat. Plane didn't fly a minute. Augers in on the simulator. Guy in the left seat was so mad that he jumped up out of the seat and started to beat the hell out of the guy in the right seat, because it was so out of standard of normal operations, and he was so caught up in the scenario that it pissed him off that bad that he went after him. And he didn't know that he was actually being filmed for a FAA research. And there was a lot that really came out of that, and it was the fact that under high-stress scenarios, as the pressure gets added on, you need help. That's not a sit down and buckle in and apply your Jedi magic tricks to start trying to absorb more and more and more and more of the burden and stress that's going on. Want to have an idea where incident command came from? NIMS, command scene management, tactics and operational stuff. That's where all this stuff comes from. It's all directly related to the more pressure, the more extreme this scenario, the more help you need. Right. And why on earth are we realizing that when we're actively on a scene? You gotta practice it and train it while you can at the station.
Yeah. I'm talking about that difficulty of replicating that stuff. We did do a deal the other night, and I tried to put some stress and some complexity to the incident, because you go to if you're lucky enough to have a training facility and you're lucky enough to have a burn building and a few props, what does everybody typically do? You go out there and you light one room on fire, and the crews go in the front door and they go in there and they take care of that one room, and everybody comes out and we talk about it. But that's not how a real incident goes. Even the simplest house fire is a complex thing, and it's tough to simulate all that. So how do you simulate complexity? How do you create some stress in the situation? You give them two things at once, or three, or four. Give them a couple incidents to run at the same time, so that when you're only running one of them, well, shoot, that's easy. I had a wreck going on over here, and a house fire here, and a car fire drill over here, and I was doing them all at the same time. So I can run one incident real easy if I can run three at the same time. And that's kind of what we did. It was in a roundabout way, but we made the incident more complex than just one room and contents, or just a normal little deal, just to put that person in that stressful situation. And it's not just the incident commander, it's the whole crew, because that stress permeates through the whole scenario, because everybody should be aware of what's going on and how complex this is getting.
Oh, well, sure. And just because you're a small department doesn't mean that you won't necessarily have a scene that almost instantly becomes overwhelming, and it could be a medical call. What's the classic definition of a mass casualty incident?
Yeah, it's when it gets beyond your capabilities.
So you have the training scenario. It's a medical call. Well, let's go ahead and make it a high-stress medical call. You've got a drowning of a child at a pool. That's high stress. And then throw in a training scenario, throw in that the grandmother, while panicking, was also having a heart attack.
Yeah.
That's two really bad scenarios that are happening there
simultaneously, and it's completely conceivable,
right,
that could happen on a normal call. It's not just this made up crazy thing. It could happen, and you could be in that situation. It's not wasted time to do that kind of training. Not at all. Not in my mind.
Now, another one, I don't know how you'd necessarily train for it. I mean, other than having the tabletop discussion, but show up to a simple motor vehicle accident. You set it up under the guise of that it's, basic command and control class. Arrive on scene, radio, size up, do your 360, you're out performing your task. Good job. By the way, simulate your reckless driver comes plowing into the scene, and so you still have a person that's being extricated. Their injuries are now worse because they've been hit. You have two people run over by a person that is part of your crew. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that you can do just from a tabletop exercise too. It does not require you to physically be out in the field doing. And I would almost argue that sometimes the tabletop exercises are more valuable than the hands-on training in the field, because you can't truly have the full undivided attention of, let's say you had 15 people in the class. You're always going to have at least one fool over there joking with his buddy. They're not paying attention. Whereas if you're doing a one-on-one tabletop exercise, you have their undivided attention.
True. And a lot of that, those incidents that we talked about this here a few podcasts back about what those complex incidents that get out of your span of control and all that stuff. I mean, guys, that stuff's everywhere, and it can happen anytime. Like, is there a road that goes through where your district is? Do you have a highway? Do you have a road? Do you have a school? Do you have school buses? I mean, what happens if a school bus rolls over?
Now, do you have trains?
You have trains? You have planes? Do planes fly over your district? I mean, this stuff's everywhere, and you can sit there in that sense of naivety and stick your head in the sand and say, oh, it's never going to happen. But, I mean, I mutual aided to a bus accident one time that was 80 miles away because they needed more ambulances. Nobody has a plan for when they need 14 ambulances. Nobody has that plan figured out.
Well, I mean, I think of just in this exact scenario you're talking about. Here in Texas, there was a call, little itty bitty department. You'll be able to find the information on the department pretty quick when I give you some details on the call. It is tiny volunteer fire department, itty bitty town. And so you'd say, well, what's the odds that they would legitimately have a 12 or 13 person fatality call to respond to, till they had a bus that had a head-on collision with a truck. And there was a lot of people that died in that accident. And I don't know the department, don't know their chief, don't know anyone on the department, don't know what their training was. But I can promise you, that call would be difficult for New York City to run, because the first unit that arrives on scene is not going to be able to handle that call. Difference is that New York City has 75,000 firefighters on their department. I highly doubt that small town had 17.
Yeah, 7 or 5.
Yeah. So that'd be one thing I would definitely tell you to kind of think outside of the box on. And it's not that you're necessarily going to derive a game plan. This isn't a checklist for an engine failure. But if you can get the basics down and get a solid operating concept of, okay, we know that there's a triage system. We can identify who our sickest and most hurt patients are, or those that have already expired. And we can start prioritizing just strictly off of that. And then when your next unit on scene arrives, you can start handing out tasks from there. I mean, just having a very basic game plan on that front is something 10,000 times better than just showing up on scene and being like, oh, there's more than one person.
And identify who who your closest mutual aid is, because you mutual aid with those people all the time. Know that next band out, and maybe even know the next band out from there. So you know, Texas, about every 15 to 30 miles there's a town. That's just kind of how Texas is laid out. So you know all those ones in that 15-mile range. Do you know all the ones in the 30? What about the ones in the 60? I mean, I'm telling you, we drove 80 miles for a college bus crash in an ambulance and a squad. Because that's how far they had to reach for mutual aid to handle that incident. And did we, at that point, were we, tearing stuff up and rescuing people? No, at that point, we were taking the ones that were basically the walking wounded, that were essentially fine or had a broken arm or something like that. We were taking the the extras, but that still had to be done.
Right. And on the flip side of that, I can tell you about the one being the recipient of a colossal amount of mutual aid. We've had 2 calls where we had a colossal industrial building fire. That was 6 counties and 16 agencies that came in. The fire itself burned for about 20 hours. And we also had to deal with a natural disaster once. And that went all the way to the big leagues, where we were bringing in Texas Task Force 1 was the one that came in. And that particular disaster, we had 25 plus departments. The one thing that I would definitely beg you to consider is, instead of just randomly showing up on scene, figure out a way to let command know that you're coming. You may have to take the time, energy, and effort to look up the phone number for whoever does their dispatching. Good guess is to call the county sheriff's department so you can get a hold of their dispatch and see if they're handling the dispatch for the call, or if they can tell you or transfer you to the agency that's dispatching the call, so that they can get the message passed forward so that they know help's coming in. Because that was a major problem for us. We had so many people coming in, and they just started doing things, and you're like, I don't even, how? Why are they there? It's actually really infuriating to deal with. Because here you are, you're busting your tail trying to set up this big scene, and you've got freelancing galore.
I would tell you that you could combat that all you want to. You're never gonna.
No, you'll never eliminate it.
And that's where staging and some of those things come in that help control some of that stuff and getting that briefing period. But you've got to commit the resources to that too. Let's jump back in on we were talking about training and some of those skills that, there's a lot of perishable skills.
Sure.
And so we spend a lot of time in somebody's initial training working on some of those basic skills, and then we may not ever touch on some of those skills again for, years. And what are some of those skills that you see that we should brush up on a little bit more than others that we don't touch as often as we should?
I think building construction. I look at building construction, fire behavior, and smoke reading. Those 3 things, I look at those as kind of like the cornerstones of basic firefighting, and I think building construction as a whole is one of those things that's real simple to kind of get lax on, particularly in just taking a half a minute to look at the new buildings that are particularly coming up into your district, and then taking that concept of building construction, but also applying it to the other factors that you would use in the totality of working a structure fire on that event. Understanding that once you take a look at the building and the layout, and you kind of see that this is maybe the trouble spot on this house. Okay, fine. So we have this spot. Well, how do we reach that spot? Well, our standard cross lays aren't going to cut it. Okay, so where are you going to get the extra hose? How are you going to set it up? And segueing off of that whole thing. It sounds kind of like a weird skill thing, but I do. I look at building construction as one of those things that really does get overlooked by a lot of people, because they're like, oh, I know what a header is. Okay, that's good. We appreciate that. What's the material?
Realize that nearly everything that's built now is lightweight wood construction. It's trusses, it's all that stuff. That's not always been the case. That's a relatively new thing in the world of construction. I mean, you're 20, 30 years of it, 40 years of it, but in the grand scheme of things, you have buildings in your district that are going to be 100, 200 years old. That stuff's out there everywhere. If you've got an old downtown, it's not built like your new hotel. And there's different things to consider with that. I agree that building construction is something, and that smoke reading and that fire behavior, and that can all get lumped into one class event that, I'm used to seeing that a once a year event. Essentially, it may go along with some work on size ups, because that's one of those things that everybody could do better with every time.
We'll have to ask one of our sponsors of our podcast, Tallman and Sons, the premier builder of 2-story outhouses.
Yes.
He might have an opinion on that. And it sounds weird, but there is. I sometimes think, don't get me wrong, when we do our primary education, spoon feed everything, direct task, direct purpose, direct use. But the fact of the matter is there's so much more to even just stretching a hose. And I will definitely tip my hat in that factor to where career departments have a very distinct advantage, because, frankly, they just train so much more theoretically. And the ability to say there's so much more to stretching the hose off the truck. Because what are you doing from a high-rise perspective? What are you doing if it's below grade perspective? Too long, too short, truck positioning, on and on. And it's all directly related to the one thing of stretching a hose line and deploying it. And when we teach it in rookie school, whether it's a paid academy or a paid fire department's academy, or whether it's a volunteer fire department's academy, when they teach stretching hose, it's literally walk up to the truck, pull it off the truck, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, I look at all those academies, whether it's whatever it is, that's truly only giving you the knowledge to go learn how to be a firefighter.
Right.
That's not making you a firefighter. There's no way the class would have to be 10 times what it is. That's to give you enough knowledge to understand what's going on so that you can go forth and learn how to do your job.
And hopefully not die in the first week.
And hopefully not die in the first week. That's a strong point. But that's what that stuff is for. I mean, that's just enough to get your feet wet to go on. And even in the things we do every day that we're what we would consider good at, single-story ranch, room and contents, that we can go in there and do, never have a problem, in and out, fire's done, we're hoses loaded, and we're gone in an hour, which we do pretty regular. We're good at that stuff because we do it all the time. We're utilizing that event that happens a lot as our training for that event and for the next event. Whether we realize it or we acknowledge it, that's what's happening. We're getting better at it because we're continuously doing that same event. But when you throw a 3-story or 4-story apartment building in there, that's a whole nother thing that we just aren't getting the practice for. And we're not working on that separate set of skills that it takes to accomplish that goal. And a lot of those skills fall to the leadership and the officers and the different approach they have to take to the incident, tactically, just in general and organizationally. But a lot of it is also the frontline firefighter that's, hooking his air up as he's going up the outside staircase to the 3rd floor apartment. He's on the ground. Well, he just used half his bottle to get up the 3 floors of stairs, and he didn't have to do that. And that's just training that we're not getting. And I'm not saying that happened. That's my example. But we're expelling energy, doing things that don't need to happen. We're wasting time, chasing dead ends. That happens a lot. And it's training, and how do we do that training? That's a little more complicated because we've got the ranch style burn building, we can practice that one all day, but we're already good at it. How do we get to that multi-story or that industrial facility or, rail car fire or whatever it is that doesn't happen?
In our particular case, I mean, you either have to take advantage of local colleges. We're very lucky in the state of Texas. We have a couple of very good area schools that are put on by volunteer departments. But there's some phenomenal area schools to go to, and then there's also a school in the cities, and then there's also the state fire school every summer down at College Station.
Yeah.
But we've been fortunate enough to be able to be funded to go to those things and be able to be smart enough to know to fill out the grant paperwork for those things. So from a tactile point of view, you can sit there and physically send people to their transportation emergencies class down at A&M. Phenomenal class. Or send them to the Metroplex, to the college, and same thing. It's like a $2.5 billion facility that they have up there, and they can set you up anything you want. But if you don't have that option, that luxury, you can have these discussions literally inside your department. You use YouTube as a resource, or if you're really thinking out of the box, go find someone that has some experience with this crap and have them come in and speak to you or the membership.
Yeah, for sure. And you figure out how to analog, substitute. You figure it out. There's 1,000 ways to figure out how to train on something, and some of it's as simple as paper and a table. And I think that's what you're getting at, that you can do as simple as a paper and a table. But to not train on it because we don't have the facility or we don't have the whatever that we don't have to jump in and do some training on those things, you're pissing in the wind.
Excuses are cheap. Lives are expensive.
Exactly.
It's really not that hard to take a serious approach to it. And that's two advantages that we have with this. Both of us are so over the top on training. It's absurd. So the department, the organization, has a significant benefit with that. But there's a lot of organizations that I've met that don't. And what it really boils down to is departments that aren't big on training and don't do it. It's because the people that are in charge were never trained.
That's very true. Or if they were trained, they're just too lazy to put effort into it.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. And, I have the advantage of I'm the training captain, and I have the advantage of having a couple of lieutenants under me that are training lieutenants. And I try to push those guys out of the box to think of things and do things. And, I try to take a true, what I consider a supervisory leadership role in that to let them expand their minds, because if they're figuring out a way to train somebody to do something that's out of the box, I'm learning from that too. I'm learning that new technique or that new skill, because all the classes I've sat through and all the stuff I've trained on, I'm biased to all that, and you're biased to the way you learned. And the reality is there's 100 ways to skin a cat. We can learn something different if we step out of our biases and our egos a little bit on some of that stuff.
Yeah, and training, we're going to segue just for a second here and talk about the actual training officer. Your training officer is a pretty special person. That's not just any person on the department that can do that. To do it good and to actually make it beneficial. And it takes someone unique enough that one that's arguably dumb enough to put the proper amount of time, energy, and effort into even trying to generate something remotely beneficial, much less the time and energy that person spent in their personal time and lives, even being able to get to the point of where they're now actually worth a crap as an instructor. And I've always kind of giggled at myself because I can whip up a PowerPoint of death and make it
In minutes.
colossally long. I mean, we're talking a 6-hour presentation. I could do a 500-page or 500-slide PowerPoint of death and make it all day long. And the kicker with it is that I can make it easy, enjoyable, tell stories, make it relatable, break it down for people, have them engaged, make it beneficial, and at the end of it, have people gain something from it. And that's not something that you're going to learn from a book.
One of my gauges that I use when I gauge whether or not I think the training was successful or good is if it invokes questions. If I'm teaching something, some class on whatever it is, nozzles, hose, and there's not a question by anybody, I'm backing up and I'm trying to figure out why there's not questions. And that's not me trying to make it so confusing that they don't understand it. It's me trying to invoke thought in their head.
Yeah, the engagement part.
It's that engagement part. And if you get to the end of your class and you say, are there any questions? And everybody says no, somebody in there has to have a question. They either don't want to engage you, they don't want to feel stupid, or maybe you're the most awesome instructor and you cracked open their head and you poured the knowledge in like Kool-Aid, and they absorbed everything that they needed to know. I don't know what the answer is there, but if I'm not getting those questions back, I'm honestly concerned about what we just did and why there's not questions.
I think part of that, at least my personal opinion, is to go ahead and condition the student, the class, to understanding that they need to expect questions. So, yeah, you had the classic, you get to a certain point and you're like, does anyone have any questions? Engage them. Turn around and particularly, the guy that's not paying attention, and just be passive aggressive about it.
Yeah.
And just say, hey, obviously you know about this, so go ahead and hammer away at it. Tell us what you know. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's not a point there where you pull out a lawn dart and start throwing it at people. But if people realize that they need to be engaged and it's okay to ask questions, then to go ahead and continue to prompt people for that engaging response. I think that's part of it. With the true PowerPoint of death, that's what happens. There's no engagement to it.
Well, they just want it to be over at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing that causes that lack of engagement. They just want it to be over, and if I shut up and I don't raise my hand, even though I don't understand anything that he said for the last hour and a half, if I don't ask a question, we can be done and go home. And that mentality comes from school. I mean, we've got a lot of young people that are fresh out of high school or college, and they don't want to engage because they don't want to be there any longer than they have to be. Everything's been up until that point has been about getting through with school as quick and as easy as I can get through with school and making a passing grade. Well, when we go into this scenario, it's not about getting through with school. It's about actually gaining the knowledge. And if you're not able to gain that knowledge and you're not gaining that knowledge, then you're not really an asset to your department.
Right.
And shifting the gears in that mentality, and I'll be honest and say that in my early days, yeah, I was like any other kid. let's just be done. Let's go home. I did school. I don't want to do this anymore. But as time progressed, and it wasn't that long, maybe a year or two in, I actually had that thirst for knowledge that made me want to know more about what I was doing.
Well, that's 95% of the battle. Hell, at least on the volunteer fire department side, they wouldn't be there if they weren't interested. You've done the hard part. You have their attention in the first 10 minutes. The question is do you have the easy part where you can actually teach a class?
Yeah.
Because the hard part's not you're not competing for their attention. They want to give you their attention. Now, the easy part is maintaining their attention. Well, obviously that's not the easy part, but I'll argue that it comes with time. Yeah. Jokes, stories, real life examples, engaging the students, asking them questions, getting them to ask you questions, giving them what ifs, have you considered, how abouts, and making the class where it's actually a really engaging class. And all of a sudden, that proverbial PowerPoint of death, it becomes a really engaging class. And you'll literally have people sit there and be like, well, I had no clue that we were here 4 hours doing this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's the way it should be. And not everybody's going to be that just knock it out of the park instructor, no matter how bad they want it.
It takes a long time. I mean, I know you have thousands, tens of thousands of hours as an instructor, particularly on the fire side. I probably have a bare minimum of 10,000 hours on the fire side, and then probably another, at least another 10 to maybe 15,000 hours as an instructor on the aviation side. I mean, I've done a lot of teaching in my life. I know how to make a presentation, and I know how to engage a group of people. It also helps that it's part of the reason that we can do this podcast. We're good at not shutting up.
Yeah, for sure. We're excellent at that, and it's more than that too. And hopefully we're engaging to the listeners as we are hopefully engaging to our students that we're teaching stuff to. But that guy and I guess that's my point. The training person, and Matt said it a while ago, that's a special person. You can't just dump that job to the guy that has 30 years experience, but he's like a stale loaf of bread. Like, it can't be that guy. They've got to be engaging. They can't just be this overbearing behemoth of a person that everybody's scared of. They've got to be approachable. There's a list of things that they've got to be. And the most important, they have to be interesting. They have to be somebody that makes the training interesting. They have to be able to convey their thoughts and what they're trying to learn and be a decent communicator. I'm not saying you got to be a great communicator. You don't have to be decent at communicating to get what you're trying to, the thoughts that are coming out of your brain to come out of your mouth. And I see a lot of times that training job, and it's never been in a department that I've been involved with, but I've seen it fall to somebody that just basically, you showed up 5 minutes late, you're the training officer. And that's just such a disservice to your membership. That if you've got a guy that's in sales, a salesman, a true actual salesman, a car salesman, or somebody like that, that guy's a better training officer than the guy that's just horrific to listen to and dry and Bueller. You know, that guy that can engage people is better. Even if he doesn't have all the knowledge, he can learn the knowledge. Guys that truly put the effort into making a class. If you're going to create a class on a subject, you learn more by creating that class than you ever knew before you started, or probably more than anybody that's taken the class.
Yeah, that was one thing I was gonna mention whenever we finish was the ultimate test to see if you know something. Try and teach it.
Yeah.
You'll find out right now at how little you actually know about something the first time you teach it.
Yeah, for sure. And if you don't know, if that question comes up you don't know, for God's sakes, just say you don't know. Say, I'll go look it up. Say, we can look it up together. Say, let's pull out the computer and figure this out right now. But don't come up with a fake answer to a question because you don't know.
Yeah, that's going to come back to haunt you.
It's horrible.
You'll immediately lose credibility too.
Well, and especially in that rookie school scenario, those people are there because they want that initial knowledge, and if you give them the wrong knowledge initially, they're going to carry that with them for the rest of their time in the fire service. They're never going to listen to the next guy that comes along because the guy that taught me originally told me that you hold the axe by the head and you beat it with the handle. And that's what they're going to live by from the rest of eternity.
Is there any specific training for, like, let's say, a real small rural department? Just of all the things that are picked on, real small rural department, is there something that they should be training on at a bare minimum of at least once a year where they're just not thinking about it and they really should be thinking about doing that often?
But one of the big things is probably ladders. Ladders is one of those things, and if you look at like the curriculum of the old curriculum of the State Firemen Fire Marshal Association, ladders was like this giant hurdle of 20 hours, and you're thinking, why do I need 20 hours of ladders? Well, ladders are inherently dangerous. Like, that's probably one of the more dangerous things you do on a fire scene is get on a ladder, carry a ladder, jab the ladder into the power lines. That's a good one. Do that one once or twice. Yeah. But it's also one of those things that just doesn't get practiced, and it doesn't get drug off the truck because, number one, nobody wants to carry that big, heavy damn thing. They just don't want to mess with it. But that's one of those things, and you can see it if you'll practice it some and do a couple of trainings on it, and then the event comes up where you needed to use that ladder. Watch how they do it. They'll do better. You can almost like clockwork. If you invest some time into some training category of whatever it is, like we're gonna invest some time in hose loads, you'll immediately see the results of that. And if it's some random thing that you don't train on very often because you never use it, if you'll throw, this month and next month we're going to train with that. Month 3, you're going to have that call. Murphy kicks in and you're going to have that call. And you're going to have that call whether you trained on it or not, so you might as well go ahead and train on whatever it is. Because it pops up. It pops up more times than not that, hey, we just trained on that. And look, we're here doing it, and this call happened. And good thing we just trained on that. You're in much better shape saying, good thing we just trained on that than, I wish we would have trained on that.
Right. What about at a medium-sized rural urban interface department?
The same things, and maybe working on more of that communication and some of that stuff, because there's the complexity of the incidents grows a little bit, and I could see that being more of a challenge. You see a lot of those guys that they're too big to be small and they're too small to be big, and that's a good way to put it. Like, those guys have to typically do bigger jobs with less resources, and the only true thing that you can do to make that easier is have better communications, because it carries through that heartache of, I've got this 8,000 square foot structure fire and I've got 14 people total. But if you've got good communications, you can alleviate a lot of the stress of that situation.
Other thing I would add in there is just general pre-planning.
For sure.
Not necessarily saying trying to pre-plan the entirety of your district. Sounds great in practice, but when you have tens of thousands of properties that you need to theoretically be pre-planning, I would say, particularly from the volunteers' perspective, don't be afraid to break things down into general categories. Not all commercial buildings are created equal. There's a big difference between a 20 office strip mall versus Home Depot or a Walmart storage center. There's a big difference between a single-story nursing home built in 1950 versus a 10-story assisted living center.
Here's my nickel's worth of free advice on a lot of that planning stuff. If you're in a small town and you've got a grocery store, chances are every member of your department goes to that grocery store. So chances are they all know the general layout of that grocery store. They know kind of how it's made. So you probably don't have to spend a lot of time on that particular building. But you have buildings that nobody goes to very often that are, I don't know, let's say the library. I'm going to be willing to bet that most of your members of your volunteer fire department don't frequent the library. They may have been there once, but you might think about spending a little time to pre-plan that one. Or a nursing home, or some facility where they're not stepping into it very often, or there may only be one or two people in the whole department that ever go there, versus the one that everybody goes to every week that they should have a pretty good knowledge of. That's my nickel's worth on pre-planning. And do not rely on, oh, Billy Bo Jim Bob works over there, he should know all about it. Well, that's going to be the week he's on vacation and he's in the Bahamas.
Or he's the one that's trapped in the building.
Yeah, he can know all about it, but if he's not there, it doesn't do anybody any good. I heard that for years. Well, y'all work in different buildings. I work in a lot of buildings because my day job is I'm an electrical contractor and an air conditioning contractor. I work in a lot of places. I know the inner workings of lots of buildings. But chances are I'm making, 20% of the calls. The other 80%, somebody else is going to have to figure out how this building's made.
Anything else on training?
No, other than train often, train a lot.
I mean, we'll have multiple discussions about this. This is just kind of a general thing. There's a lot of places that you can go with training. And again, I'm not a big fan of armchair quarterbacking stuff. I kind of walked a fine line with the Brit a little bit ago. That's personal flavor, personal taste. I would highly recommend that whatever procedure you use at your department, hone it in, train like hell, make it as perfect as you can possibly make it. Because at the end of the day, it's what you have to do. That's the purpose of it. And for us, our tactic's speed. We're after speed. I'm not after 14 hours of preparation and a ton and a half worth of equipment. I'm after speed.
If you notice something that your department or a large portion of your department is struggling with, get out there and train on it. Figure out what those things are, what those I hate to even call it a weakness because it may not be a weakness. It may just be something that you're not doing regularly and it needs that brushing up. Get out there and figure those things out. Training is not your business meeting.
Nope.
And I see that everywhere a lot. And training is not going to annual school once a year. That's not a training program for your department. Training and the annual schools and area schools, and trust me, I taught a whole bunch of area schools. I traveled all over doing that and had a great time. But that's not your department, and that's not your fellow members. That's not your team building opportunity, which is also another big part of the training that we didn't even jump off into is team building, because that's a huge part of it. And if you're not doing that stuff, and if you've got those guys that just never flat show up to training, you've got to figure that out. I mean, they're hurting you, you're hurting, because they're not being part of your team.
Yeah, that'd be the one thing I would definitely say to any volunteer department out there is, and I'm not saying every department's got a handful of people that have a very specific role, job, task. Okay, I'm perfectly fine with that. That said, they need to be dang good at what they do.
Yeah. They
need to be dang good at what they do, and there's nothing wrong with having a 65, 70, 75-year-old man or woman join the department. Obviously, they're not going to necessarily be your interior firefighting crew, but there's nothing wrong with getting them trained on building construction, situational awareness, how to handle basic first aid, hose rolling, stretching, water supply, be utility in your function. There is more to it than just stretching a hose line.
Yeah, and I truly look at it like, if you're especially a volunteer, if you're a volunteer firefighter, your goal should be to be the most well-rounded volunteer you can be. And I realize that there's limitations, and some people have limitations on what they can and can't do, and not everybody can be that all-around just awesome person at everything they touch, but you should make an effort towards the knowledge of being an all-around person.
And it really just boils down to, because you never know what you're going to get in a scenario.
That's right. You never know what job you're going to do. You never know where you're going to be stuck in the ranks of what that is. And there's no way to say that my only job here is to cut holes in roofs. That's not probably a good job to be the only job you have, because you're not going to get to expand on anything. You're going to have the worst job ever.
Yeah, you'll be locked in. Well, do you have anything else?
No, but we sufficiently talked for a while.
Excellent. Guys, we appreciate everyone listening. Somehow or another, the Seattle market's the hot area for us. We have no clue how. We appreciate everyone listening. If anyone ever does have any questions, concerns, comments, or would like to hear us nonsensically ramble about just complete, utter chaos, then by all means, please drop us a line and let us know. You can always reach us through our email. Yeah. ittasteslikeburnincast@gmail.com.
And leave us a review and follow and all those things that everybody asks you to do. It doesn't cost you anything.
All righty.
All right. Have a good evening.
We'll see you later.